In this documentary, I'm going to explain why the slave trade developed, what it was like as a slave, who ended it, and why it ended. The transatlantic slave trade started during the 15th century when Portugal began expanding their empire and reached Africa. They captured slaves from Africa and sold them to the rest of Europe. Later on, Europeans set up plantations in the Americas. Workers were wanted. In result of this need, the slave triangle was created. Northern African rulers captured slaves, and then in return they got guns to capture more slaves. At the plantation, sugar, coffee and cotton was being farmed and sold to the Europeans. This trade is in the shape of a triangle, hence the name. The slave's journey from northern Africa to the Americas is called the Middle Passage. This is a particularly terrible part of the slave trade because as much slaves as possible were crammed into small ships to maximise profits. However, in result of this need, disease spread quickly, there was not enough food to go around, and most babies died.
Slavery began around 250 years ago. There was no TV bulletins showing the horrendous conditions on slave ships or newspapers reporting the conditions. Newspapers that did exist tended to focus on the rich. Most people couldn't read it anyway. This meant that most people drinking tea, cakes, etc. didn't know how it was produced. People who knew that didn't tell anyone because they wanted to profit from the slave trade. To end slavery, the abolitionists needed to do two things: make people aware of what was going on and put pressure on those with the power to change the law. They did this by introducing many of the ways of campaigning that we take for granted today. Today we use the slogans of free shirts or campaign badges or to support a cause. After Parliament rejected the Abolition Bill in 1791, abolitionists took action by suspending Parliament entirely and calling for a boycott on Britain's largest import slave-grown sugar. A man named Adam Smith said that slave work business are not as good as paid workers business because slaves are not likely to work as hard as they have no rest and most likely do not like their master or the fact that they were poor. Therefore, they do not want to work for them or make money for them. Quaker and Methodist Christians spoke against slavery in the courts of law, and also ex-African slaves, e.g. Oludu Equino, campaigned against slavery. Oludu Equino bought himself to freedom for £40 in 1766. He became a sailor and travelled all over the world. He wrote an autobiography in 1789. Tens of thousands of people read his book, or heard him speaking and decided to join his cause for the abolition of slavery. Ignatius Sancho taught himself to read, write, play music, and write poetry. He played and spoke about slave trade. Both these people were very influential to the abolition of slavery.
White campaigners played a large role in the abolishment of the slave trade, because many great campaigners such as William Wilberforce campaigned against slavery, but also groups of people such as Quakers and Methodist Christians spoke against slavery in the courts of law. In 1787, a few men created a Christian group called the Quakers. They were very religious and spoke against slavery. We know this because Edward Burrough, 1634 to 1666, said, "We are not names, nor men, nor titles of government, nor are we this party, nor against other." Because of this, its name and pretense, but we are for justice and mercy and truth and peace and true freedom, that these may be excelled in our nation. This shows us that the Quakers are anti-slavery because a member stated that freedom should be given to all in the nation, including slaves, as well as groups of white campaigners. There were also individuals like William Wilberforce, Granville Sharp, and Josiah Wedgwood. Josiah Wedgwood, a famous potter, made plaques against the slave trade. William Wilberforce was a member of Parliament. He was also campaigning against slavery and made many speeches about why it should be banned. We know this because he famously quoted, "It is the true duty of every man to promote the happiness of his fellow creatures to the utmost of his power." The phrase "fellow creatures" includes African slaves as well. This shows us that Wilberforce was campaigning against slavery because he said, "With all your power, bring happiness to each other." Some ordinary people were against slavery also. Evidence to prove this is that in 1788, in Bristol, some 1,800 people signed a petition against slavery. It was one of the first political campaigns where women were allowed to take part. Also, some women started a boycott of slave-produced sugar. This boycott forced many plantations to convert or shut down. Economics also played a large role in the abolishment of the slave trade. 1776, a young man named Adam Smith said that slave work businesses were not as reliable or profitable as non-slave businesses, because slaves are not likely to work to their full potential as they are not fed properly and have minimal rest. We know this because he said, "Man is an animal that makes bargains. No dog exchanges bones with another." Adam Smith also saw a lot of competition in the slave trade, bringing the price of slaves down, in result making the slave trade not as profitable as it used to be. He came to the conclusion that it'll be cheaper to pay for workers at a low wage rather than buying them housing, food, and clothes. In conclusion, we think that economics is the main factor to the abolishment of the slave trade. We think this because money can change people's actions and emotions. We know this because in the mid-1900s, there was a growing emphasis or impact in economics, the Wall Street crash, which led to depression. This proves our point because the Wall Street crash shows how money can change people's attitude.